It is officially Prose Friday. I've renamed the functions of the week now officially. I'm going to go back to an old favorite now, which I have shared with you before. We did Gatsby, I think some of you will remember. It's The Art of X-Ray Reading by Roy Peter Clarke. And it really gives you some hints as to how better to approach reading literature, plays, everything. It's been an invaluable volume for me. And what we're going to do today is read something that I first came across at FLT, that's Fernandina Little Theater. Kate Hart did a production of a recreation of a short story, and that was The Lottery. And the play was really quite chilling to do, and it was taken from the short story. And we begin. X-raying the lottery. Subtitle, Piling Stones. Shirley Jackson once said she wrote the short story, The Lottery, in one sitting, and I believe her. On June 26, 1948, soon after it was written, it was published in the New Yorker magazine, and it may have been the first serious story that ever moved me. Moved me is a euphemism. It scared me. Among Jackson's talents as a writer was her ability to evoke terror, as exhibited in her 1959 novel, The Haunting of Hill House, widely considered to be among the best haunted house novels ever written. By the way, this is outside the story in the book and into me. I read that when I was fairly young, and I will kid you not, I wouldn't have gone into an old house if you'd paid me. You'd have to be holding my hand. Can we talk about terror? If you want a good scare, go find that particular novel. Now we're going back to the reading. I encountered The Lottery in an anthology in the early 1960s when I was in high school. The first thing I might have noticed was its brevity, a relief from longer assignments. The story was just 10 book pages long. So quick and sharp, it felt like a knife in the back. It's hard to think of a shorter story that has been so widely read and remarkably influential. But before fame came infamy. Upon publication, The Lottery soon generated more mail than any work of fiction in the history of the New Yorker. The great majority of letters expressing puzzlement, disgust, or outrage. So much hostile mail filled Shirley Jackson's Vermont mailbox that she would write about the experience in her essay, Biography of a Story. The problem for many readers was a failure to recognize the story as a work of fiction. They thought the lottery was real. In other words, they thought there was a small rural village somewhere in America, in New England, perhaps, where a fertility ritual was held every summer. An old black box was carted out of storage into the town square. The names of family members were placed in a box. And when everyone was present, a family name, then the name of a single individual, was drawn. The winner of the lottery was stoned to death. In case you skipped over that last sentence, I'll repeat it and put it in italics. The winner of the lottery was stoned to death. Jackson blamed the reader misperception upon ignorance, but that was too harsh. Let's remember that a decade earlier, in 1938, some panic erupted over a fictional radio broadcast, The War of the Worlds by Orson Welles, in which Earth was under invasion by aliens from Mars. Nor can we forget that the 1940s saw the Holocaust, the genocidal extermination of Jews and others in Nazi concentration camps. With such scapegoating on a massive scale, the ritual execution of a single woman may not have seemed so unimaginable. Now, it's hard to think of rank and file readers of a magazine as sophisticated as the New Yorker as an ignorant or simple-minded. The source of confusion, I now believe, is the way the story was written. Readers thought the lottery was real because Shirley Jackson created a world that seemed real. How she did that, and how we can do that, will be revealed in our X-ray reading. To summarize again, the story is set in a small rural town that each summer conducts a lottery. If the lottery goes well, tradition dictates, a good crop will follow. The town's 300 or so people gather in the town square and draw pieces of paper out of an old black box. What Shirley Jackson leaves for the very end of the story, with taut suspense, is the nature of the prize for the winner of the lottery, in this case, a Mrs. Tessie Hutchinson. Here is the chilling conclusion. I read this from the actual short story. Bill Hutchinson went over to his wife and forced the slip of paper out of her hand. It had a black spot on it. The black spot Mr. Summers had made the night before with a heavy pencil in the coal company office. Bill Hutchinson held it up, and there was a stir in the crowd. All right, folks, Mr. Summers said, let's finish quickly. Although the villagers had forgotten the ritual and lost the original black box, they still remembered to use stones. The pile of stones the boys had made earlier was ready. There were stones at the ground with the blowing scraps of paper that had come out of the box. Mrs. Delacroix selected a stone so large she had to pick it up with both hands and turned to Mrs. Dunbar. Come on, she said. Hurry up. Mrs. Dunbar had small stones in both hands, and she said, gasping for breath, I can't run at all. You'll have to go ahead, and I'll catch up with you. The children had stones already. Someone gave little Davy Hutchinson a few pebbles. Tessie Hutchinson was in the center of a cleared space by now, and she held her hands out desperately as the villagers moved in on her. It isn't fair, she said. A stone hit her on the side of the head. Old Man Warner was saying, come on, everyone. Steve Adams was in the front of the crowd of villagers with Mrs. Graves beside him. "It isn't fair. It isn't right," Mrs. Hutchinson screamed. And then they were on her. Let's examine how this final scene unfolds, focusing on the strategies most storytellers can use. Now we're back to the X-ray reading. Subtitle heading: Call the townspeople together. When my mom was a daily watcher of TV soap operas, she often commented on how these stories were organized. "Watch for the party scenes," she'd say, especially weddings. It was at such social events that the various characters, subplots, and narrative threads could be joined together. That insight applies to storytelling in every form I can think of. Chaucer gathers 29 pilgrims at the Tabard Inn at the beginning of the Canterbury Tales. As the frame for the Decameron, Boccaccio gathers 7 women and 3 men in a villa outside Florence, where they seek shelter from the Black Death. Consider how Shakespeare gathers most of the main characters in Hamlet to attend the play within the play, the mouse trap in which the king's treachery will be revealed. As we shall see in some detail, King Arthur gathers his courtiers for a huge Christmas party at the beginning of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. The Godfather begins at the wedding of the Don's daughter and ends with a christening, while mobsters gun down their rivals. The second season of Buffy the Vampire Slayer ends splendidly with an apocalyptic battle at the high school graduation. Oh, think how Frank Capra, about the same time Jackson was writing her story, was persuading moviegoers that this is a wonderful life in the final scene, in which the townspeople squeeze into George Bailey's living room, donate money to pay his debt, drink, and sing Christmas carols. It is quite remarkable that Jackson could pull off this trick of gathering in so few pages. We learn early on that the whole process of the lottery in this town is conducted within 2 hours. Now, that gives the story the feel of the classical unities: time, place, and action. But time does pass, and the square fills, at first gradually and innocently enough, with school children, and then with more urgency. There is communal terror here, the sacrificial taking of a life with the blind compliance of all citizens. Look at the characters who are brought in to carry out the sentence. They begin with the scapegoat's husband, then Mrs. Summers, then 2 women, and then the little son, then old man Warner, then a young man in front of a crowd next to a woman with the last name of Graves. These individuals are not chosen for their distinctive identities. They are differentiated only to reveal that their differences in age, strength, and association are overcome by the communal fear and hatred that turns them all into ritual killers. Next subsection. Stones to pebbles. To understand the narrative efficiency in the lottery, we have to understand the difference between the words stone and rock. And this requires that we don our X-ray glasses. Dictionaries reveal that in most circumstances, the two words are used as synonyms. I can say that I threw a rock through my neighbor's window, or that I threw a stone. No reader would wonder at the difference. I could find no instance in the story where Jackson uses the word rock for variation. It's stones, stones, and more stones. Now, consider this early passage. Again, I read from the story. Bobby Martin had already stuffed his pockets full of stones, and the other boys soon followed his example, selecting the smoothest and roundest stones. Bobby and Harry Jones, and Dickie Delacroix, eventually made a pile of stones in one corner of the square, guarded it against the raids of the other boys. Now, back to X-ray reading. In the next paragraph, stones will be mentioned twice more. In the passage leading up to the ritual execution of Mrs. Hutchinson, the word stone or stones is repeated 7 times. The only variation is not rocks, but pebbles, which are placed into the hand of little Davy Hutchinson for use against his mother. This is a brilliant and poignant choice by Jackson. A reminder of how we train our children to carry on our culture's darkest practices. Stone is the word of choice for Jackson because it's a name for a form of execution, stoning, an ancient practice in many cultures and religions that, however barbaric, can still be found today. It has long been a punishment for women and men caught in adultery. The benefit of stoning, if there can be one, is that it's a communal activity. In the absence of a professional executioner, no one knows for sure who has dealt the fatal blow. Given the theme of the lottery, the blindness of communities locked into mindless traditions, stoning turns out to be the perfect choice. Since I have read the story so many times now, it's almost impossible for me to identify the places where, as reader, I begin to worry about the outcome. In some stories, foreshadowing is obvious. In better stories, it may not be recognizable at first glance. In other words, you may have to experience the story more than once to get the connection. So it was at the beginning of the lottery. Those piles of stones looked like the makings of a childish game, rather than implements of ritual murder. Each mention of the word stones becomes the percussive beat of a death march. Next subsection. A dark and sunny night. Nothing in the first paragraph of the lottery should cause concern in the reader. The weather is clear and sunny. Flowers are blossoming. The grass is thick and green. On this beautiful day, people are gathering in the square. The lottery will take less than 2 hours, which is a good thing, so that villagers will be able to get home for noon dinner. Let's stone the lady to death and go home and eat some fried chicken. Readers imagine that an important clue to the tone and the action of the story will be its setting, which includes descriptions of the weather. An X-ray reading of the lottery reminds us that nature is oblivious to the moods and needs of human beings. I can remember a terrible day in the history of my family when the Florida sun was shining and a balmy breeze made it seem like paradise. September 11th, 2001 was a sparkling day in New York City until the planes hit the towers. We were all brought up on scary stories that occurred on dark and stormy nights. We may be tempted to harmonize nature with narrative action and emotion. This is usually a mistake. Weather can alter human action, of course, but for better or worse, nature is indifferent. When exactly, then, might a reader feel uneasy? Perhaps when the men gather and we read that their jokes were quiet and they smiled rather than laughed. I admit to being hyper attentive to language, but that distinction, smiling rather than laughing, suggests a hint of anxiety and self-consciousness. The tone of the story turns darker when the black box is carted out. Jackson makes a lot out of the appearance of the box. Not only is it black, it's also shabby and splintered. When not in use, it is moved from place to place for storage. We learn that there had once been a ritual associated with the lottery, a tuneless chant and some kind of salute. Then there is some gossip about how the lottery had been eliminated in some villages. This negative energy builds and builds until the winner of the lottery utters her complaints about the unfairness of it all. And then they were upon her. Death at the end has become a pattern. We've seen the murder at the end of Gatsby, murder at the end of Lolita, death of a mother and child by way of Hemingway, 6 murders at the end of A Good Man is Hard to Find, and a ritual execution to end the lottery. Whatever our hopes and dreams, we cannot escape the fact that stories are largely about suffering, and occasionally the deaths of sympathetic characters. Another subsection. Blessing becomes a curse. One of the most persistent narrative patterns in literature, including journalism, is the manner in which a curse can become a blessing, and a blessing can become a curse. In most nonfiction stories about lotteries that I know, the winner gets a lot of money, and then squanders it, falling into depression and regret. A Florida man was murdered for his winnings. Now that pattern is played out in the lottery and imitated in The Hunger Games and its sequels, a series of popular novels and movies about a young woman who must fight to the death against other winners of a lottery, in this case, a ritual of state control. In many cases, you are chosen for something. You know, you might win a prize. In the case of gambling, you might hit your number. But also consider the idiom. Your number is up. Perhaps you were chosen in the military draft, or for jury duty, or the graveyard shift. In each case, random chance can collide with human choice to create destiny. A blessing, you know, such as becoming Princess Diana, can become a curse. And a curse, such as breaking your ankle, can become a blessing when you marry the nurse. And now to the conclusion, writing lessons. Number 1, gather the townspeople. Most characters in stories interact one-on-one or in small groups. Look for opportunities to bring them together, especially in the middle of narratives where we can take stock of them. Many of the opportunities for such gatherings are ritualistic, such as weddings, funerals, which lend their own energy to the larger narrative. 2, differentiate between synonyms. Remember that Jackson repeated stones and did not allow any variation for rock. There is value in not accidentally repeating a key word. When you do repeat one, do so purposefully, squeezing every ounce of meaning out of it. When you repeat and repeat, and then vary, as when Jackson mentions the pebbles in the hand of the young boy, it will magnify the effect. 3, nature need not cooperate, and often should not. To create an appropriate setting and landscape for a story, the weather has to do something, but it need not align itself to the will of human beings. Happy times can occur in blizzards. The sun smiles down on bloody killers. The more realistic your work, the more unpredictable the connection between the elements outside and the internal landscape of character and motive. 4, tie the ending to the beginning. We are seeing a recurrence of this pattern in which a story seems to return to the place where it began. The narrator of Gatsby sees that green light on Daisy's dock at the beginning and at the end. Grandma in Good Man reads about the misfit at the beginning of the story and meets him at the end. The stones piled up by children at the beginning of the lottery kill Mrs. Hutchinson at the end. The key is this: even though a pattern is repeated or a character returns, nothing is as it was the first time. 5, reveal how a blessing becomes a curse. Blessings and curses rotate in a kind of yin-yang wheel until it is hard to recognize the distinction. This pattern exists, of course, in real life, made emblematic in the phrase, "Be careful what you wish for." It occurs in every dimension of narrative and myth, from creation stories to beast fables to nursery rhymes. When a character or a circumstance appears too good, warns editor Mike Wilson, look for the bruise on the apple. And finally, 6. Kill someone at the end. Go ahead, pull the trigger, light the fuse, reveal the dagger hidden in the desk drawer. One of the 2 dominant modes of dramatic narrative, tragedy, requires suffering and, ultimately, death. But death can work in comedy as well as a prologue to the birth of a new generation. I leave you with these X-ray thoughts about the lottery, and do encourage you to take a look at this book. It's really quite spectacular. And also, do know that come Wednesday, we're not having a lottery. No, we're going to have a session of brilliant poetry. Come, join together on Wednesday for poetry. Now you have a good weekend. Thank you for listening.